Hello and welcome back to the channel on our continuing voyage to become better blues players. My name's Mark, and in this lesson we're going to look at playing the changes over slow blues in G, but this time in box 4. So playing the changes means that we adjust what we're playing, what scale, what notes we're targeting, depending on how the chord changes through the 12-bar chord progression. And box 4 simply means box 4 of the pentatonic scale. That's what we're going to take our starting point as. Right, so the way the lesson is going to work is I'm going to explain what box 4 is and show you the scale pattern for that. Then we'll talk about the notes that we need to target in box 4. Then I'm going to show you an example of me playing a solo using this technique over slow blues, and then we'll come back on the other side. I'll pull all the licks apart, show you them one by one, with tab available and all that kind of good stuff. Okay, so when we mean box position 4, what we're talking about is playing our G minor pentatonic scale that we all know and love. Box 1 here, this is the one we're probably most familiar with. Okay, but instead of playing it there, we're going to play it in what we call box position 4. So that's box 1, then there's box 2 here, there's box 3 round there, and box 4 actually starts on the 10th fret of the A string. That's where we're going to anchor ourselves off. We could also think of it as 12th fret of the G string. Both of those are in this scale pattern. So the scale pattern goes like this. Okay, so that's the scale shape that we're going to be using. Now, I have taught an entire lesson on just using box 4 in the past. I'll put a link in the description below. So if you're not familiar with box 4, go back and check that out. Okay, so that's box 4, and I'll put a scale diagram on screen, and there'll be one included in the tab that accompanies this lesson as well. Okay, so that's box 4. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the notes to target within box 4. So the first thing we could do is when we play the changes, when we play over a G chord, we can target the G note. When we play over the C chord, we target the C note. And when we play over the D chord, we target the D note. So we could just use those notes in that box position, but targeting those particular notes. So we have a G here, 12th fret G string. So we can play licks that target that. And then when we move to the C, well, we have a C here, 13th fret of the B string. So we can play licks that target that C note. By target, I mean kind of dance around but hang on to that note. Kind of go round it but land on it and spend the longest time on it. And then for D, well, we've got a D here as well. That's 10th fret of the top E string. And then the C, and then back to the G. So if we're playing over that part of the 12-bar chord progression where we've got a D chord, down to a C chord, back to a G chord, and then finally back to a D chord, so those last 4 bars of a 12-bar blues, well, our D that we could target is here, our C is here, our G is here, and then for the D, we can either go for this one here, or actually we have a D there as well. So we might play a line that kind of targets the D note like this, and a line that targets the C note like this, and then back to the G. And then we target that D7 again, and then back to the G. Okay, something like that. Anyway, that's the basic idea. So you have those notes in there that you can play, and you don't need to worry about adding any extra notes. You just target those ones using that scale pattern, and that's kind of like your first step into playing the changes in box 4. Now, we can go on a step further than that. If we think of the notes in a G7, so we have this G7 chord here. Think of that G7 there, but bar it all the way up here, using this kind of A7 shape from here that we all know and love, but barred right up here at the 10th fret. That's a G7 chord. Now, one thing we notice about a G7 chord is it includes 12th fret B string, that note there. But that note is not in G minor pentatonic. G minor pentatonic has the 11th fret of the B string, not the 12th fret of the B string. So we've got this extra note that's in the chord but not in the scale. Now, the point of playing the changes is if we add that note to our scale while we play over the G7 chord, we're really going to emphasize that G7 sound. So we can play licks like this. In fact, the very first lick in our example solo is going to go like this. 1, 2. There we go, and actually land and emphasize that note there, even though it's not in our scale. So we add that note just while we play over the G7 chord. Okay, when we then play a C7, well, our C7, if we imagine taking a D7 shape here, you know this chord that we know and love, but we bar it all the way up here, that's a C7. Now, what we notice there is that note on the top E string, which is actually 12th fret top E string is an E, that note isn't in our scale. So our scale has 13 and 10, 13, 11 on the B string, but on the top E string it's 13, 10, but it doesn't have that 12th fret. So just while we're over that C7 chord, we could add 12th fret of the top E string. If we do that, then we really emphasize that C7 note, but we don't use it elsewhere, we just use it over the C7. Okay, and then we can do the same thing over a D7. If we think of a D7 here, so that's a D7 chord. Well, we've got these two notes on the top E and B string. Now, we can emphasize those notes. We're really going to sound like we're playing D7. Now, you can also add in a G sharp here, which is 11th fret of the G string. In my example, I don't tend to use that one very much, but it's another note that you can add into the scale and emphasize while we're on a D7 chord. But if we just, in the example that I'm going to play, I play a line that basically runs down from this D note, which I'm going to play here now, top E string, 10th fret, down to our A note, which is 10th fret of the D string, of the B string. So the actual lick goes like this. And that fits really nicely over that D7 chord. D7 chord there as well, because both of those notes are in that D7 chord. Okay, now the way I actually play it in the example solo is I don't hit a 10th fret of the top E string. What I actually do is I take a 13th fret of the B string and bend it up a whole tone like this. So the actual lick in the example solo goes like this. And that fits over that D7 chord. Okay, you'll hear this in context in a moment. So you can target those notes. So the point of this is there are extra notes that you can throw into the scale that you add in just over certain chords, and it really kind of sounds like you know what you're doing, you're playing the changes. It becomes more harmonically rich because you're targeting notes that actually exist in the underlying chords. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put all of this in context. There's been a lot of theory so far. I'm going to play an example so you can hear all of this in context, and I'll come back on the other side and pull all the licks apart and show you them one by one. Okay, so here's the example. Okay, so that was the example then. What we'll do now is I will pull all of those apart and show those licks one by one and explain all the notes and everything. But before we do, a little bit of housekeeping. There is tab available for this lesson. I have to have the tab professionally produced. I pay a guy in Europe to do that for me, and he produces it, and that's paid for by the Patreon supporters and those who leave tips in my PayPal tip jar. So big thank you to those people who do that, because that helps keep this channel running and it makes the tab available for everyone. So if you would like a free copy of the tab, please send me an email. My details are in the description below, and ask for the tab for, let's call this one, playing the changes in box 4. Next time I'm online, I will simply email the tab back to you. Please remember to include the name of this lesson, because I have that many lessons now. Just simply asking for the tab. I don't know which lesson you're referring to. Okay. Also, please subscribe. As YouTube tells me that the majority of people who watch my lessons aren't actually subscribed. So if you're watching these lessons, you're learning from them, you're enjoying them, and you want to get notified of when I've got new lessons coming out, please hit that subscribe button. Also, that would really help me with the the YouTube algorithm, as would leaving me a comment. Please, we're getting towards the end of the year now. I'm thinking about what lessons to do next year. If you've got thoughts of things that you would like me to cover, please leave me a comment down below. Okay, anything else? Oh yes, there's a backing track available as well. Again, see details in the description below, so you can play this solo yourself over the backing track, or just jam these ideas and improvise something. Okay, it's all the housekeeping out the way. Let's get on with the licks. So the solo starts with a 4-bar counting. Sorry, a 4-beat counting on a bar preceding. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the chord progression starts. So what we do is we come in on beat 3. So you count 2, 1, 2, and then we get this lick. So the lick goes like this. 1, 2. Okay, and I'll do it nice and slow. 1, 2. Okay, the notes again, but just sound really slow. Start with this big bend. Okay, and as I said earlier, we're in G minor pentatonic box position 4, but we're actually adding this note, so you notice we end on that note to really emphasize it. Okay, that's lick 1. Lick 2 then moves over to the C7 chord, and it goes like this. Okay, and nice and slow. Notice I'm really targeting this 13 B string, because that's the note of C. So that's the root note of the underlying chord. Once again, super slow. Start with this slide in. Okay, that was lick 2. Lick 3 then goes like this. Really nice and simple. We'll do it again nice and slow. It's a hammer on 11 to 12 on the B string. So really emphasizing that note there and this note here. Okay, so that was moving from the C7 back over to the G7. That was lick 3. Lick 4 then goes like this. Okay, and nice and slow. And even slower again. That's over that G7 chord, and that's just a straight G minor pentatonic lick. Okay, lick 5, we're now moving over to the C7 chord. We're gonna pull out notes from a C7 arpeggio. We're actually gonna start with this one, 9 down here on the G string, and the lick goes like this. And nice and slow. Notice I've got the E note here. We start with 9th fret of the G string. That's not in the scale, but we've added it because it's in the C7 chord. And we're also hitting 12th fret top E string again, because that note's not in our scale, but it is in the underlying chord. So we're really kind of emphasizing that we know what we're doing here. Okay, so that was lick 5. Lick 6 then goes like this. Okay, and nice and slow. again, notice how we're getting this top E string 12th fret in there, not in the underlying scale, but it is in the chord. Okay, that was lick 6. Lick 7, now we're going to move back from the C7 to the G7, and this is just like lick 3, except we just hit the last note a few more times, and it goes like this. Okay, nice and slow. Start the hammer on. Okay, lick 8 then, again over the G7 chord, and it goes like this. Nice and slow. Okay, and I'll do it one more time, nice and slow. And I think on the performance I actually slid down out of that one as well. So again, just noticing that we're adding in that B string 12th fret because we're over a G7 chord, so we want to pull out that particular note. Okay, lick 9 though, this comes in just before we move to the D7 chord, and it goes like this. Nice and slow. Okay, so notice we're emphasizing this D note here by bending up to it. And then we're ending on this A note here because both that D and that A, they're both in the underlying D7 chord, that one there. You may recognize that. I've used that on lessons before. It's one of my favorite licks to play over that 5 chord. Okay, so that was over the D7 chord. The C7 chord then goes like this. And nice and slow. And even slower again. We start with this pull off. Again, it's C7, so I'm bringing in that top E string 12th fret. Okay, now we're going to move from the C7 to the G7, and that's going to go like this. Okay, so I'll do it again nice and slow. Okay, so that was lick 11. Lick 12, our last lick, then goes like this. Okay, and again, nice and slow. Okay, the only tricky thing with this one really is when we get this bend, 13th of the B string, we're bending it up. The second time we bend it up, we kind of hold it there and with our little finger grab top E string at the 13th fret. So it's this. Sorry, it's like this. Okay, it's that little move, grabbing it with the top E string. Okay, that's kind of like the only tricky thing to get in there. Okay, so that's all the licks. I hope you enjoyed this. Take care, and I'll see you next time.